What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you a video on how to beat Sky Striker Trickstar. This deck has undeniably solidified itself as the strongest deck of the format, so I thought it'd be a good idea to make a video for you guys on some cards and some tips to help you guys combat this absolutely powerful matchup. But before we get into it, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest patrons, as always. So big shout outs today to Jorge, as well as Michael. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through Patreon, then check out the Patreon link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, Sky Striker Trickstar is a very interesting mix because you've got the aggressive burn elements of Trickstar combined with the control disruptive elements of a deck like Sky Striker. And both of these decks have engines that are very small but also generate tons of advantage. So when you combine them together, you've got an absolutely potent and powerful deck. Now, this deck does have its weaknesses, and that's what we're going to try to hone in on this video and give you guys some of the most generic cards and options in terms of helping combat this matchup. So I want to start off with hand traps because compared to some of the other strongest decks of past formats, hand traps don't actually have the same type of effect as they do against Sky Striker Trickstar. You know, if you look at a deck, say for instance like Goki, against Goki you can actually use cards like Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence also have a very good effect against that deck as well. Hell, even Ghost Bell. But Sky Striker Trickstar is a little bit different because there's only a couple of hand traps that are really effective in this matchup. Starting off with Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom's incredibly good because the deck just does so much searching. I mean, you've got stuff like Terraforming, Light Stage, Candina, Startup Engage. I mean, I could keep going on, but one of the strongest cards that you can stop with a card like Ash Blossom is Trickstar Reincarnation. If you can do anything in your power to not get hit by the Trickstar Reincarnation Droll and Lockbird combo, that's going to just benefit you. But the fact that Ash Blossom is so ubiquitous and has so many instances where it can be an absolute just powerful blowout is the reason why you're going to want to have as many copies as possible for this particular matchup. Another card, as we just mentioned, is actually Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird can be very effective against this matchup since it does do so much searching, which means you can cut off the supply of resources and basically take control of the game from there. Droll and Lockbird is even more effective if your deck has the ability to OTK. One of the weaknesses of this deck is that it doesn't have the best time OTKing its opponents because even though it does have some aggressive elements, it isn't really designed to OTK. It's more just kind of designed to out-resource your opponent, but it has a lot of powerful tools at doing that. Compared to a deck like Goki or maybe even Spiral, these decks can OTK hard, and so by having a card like Droll and Lockbird, if you stop your opponent from acquiring the resources that they might need to set up on their turn, you can just go in with a deck like Goki or Spiral, OTK them, and you're going to be in an absolute powerful position. Now, the thing is, Scapegoat is a card you definitely have to worry about because Scapegoat is essentially the ultimate OTK deterrent because if you get all the monsters on the field and try to OTK, you know that last line of defense they may have in Scapegoat means that you might not be able to seal up that game. But by being able to destroy all of their Scapegoats, you're still in a relatively good position because you have to think otherwise, they would have gotten that Scapegoat for free. So if you can destroy as many Scapegoats as humanly possible, that means they're not going to be able to link off into a plethora of different link monsters, and you're going to be in a very good position because now they have to rely on the rest of their cards in their hand if they want to progress with any further plays. The last hand trap I want to discuss is PSY-Framegear Gamma. Now, Gamma isn't necessarily good against the Sky Striker Trickstar deck itself because there isn't really a good opportunity to really use it. I mean, if you try to use it on Candina, they can bounce Candina back with Licorice, and then that way you're negating the effect, but Candina's back in their hand for next turn. So you didn't really do a whole lot. I guess you could hit something like Kagari or maybe one of the other Link monsters that go into off of Scapegoat, but even then, that's not exactly a very, kind of silver bullet situation. However, where Gamma can be very powerful is the fact that these decks are running Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and Droll and Lockbird pretty much in max capacity, and what that means is that if you're able to hit something like Ash or Droll on the activation of any of your spell cards going first, you can use Gamma, negate the activation of that hand trap, and not only are you free to continue with your turn, but you're also going to get a PSY-Frame Lord Omega for your troubles. So think about it, your opponent just wasted a card, so now they're down to 4 cards in hand, Omega can rip another card out of their hand, so now they're down to 3, and you're going to be able to accrue just as much advantage as possible because your deck is now going to be able to go off. Gamma isn't for every deck because you have to have a deck that can essentially get searches or cards that are going to bait out cards like Ash and Droll and Lockbird before you're able to summon a monster to the field. But if you're able to pull it off, this card can be an absolute blowout. But as the turns progress, Gamma does get progressively worse, so that is something you definitely want to keep in mind. So speaking of hand traps, one of the other cards I think is particularly good in this matchup is Called by the Grave. Now the reason for this is because this is essentially your 4th, 5th, and 6th way, in addition to Ash Blossom, to stop yourself from getting hit by that Droll Reincarnation combo. Now, getting hit for Droll Reincarnation for maybe 1 or 2 cards isn't the worst, but it's really bad when you have a hand of 5, maybe 6 cards, and then you just lose your entire hand and you pretty much just lost the game to this degenerate combo. But Called by the Grave is good because you can negate the Droll and Lockbird, and that means you're going to be able to proceed with the rest of your plays. And even outside of the hand traps, negating Droll, negating Ash, if your opponent targets something like a Candina with Trickstar Reincarnation to resurrect, you can use Called by the Grave to banish that Candina and effectively make that Reincarnation a dead card. So there's even some application for this card outside of the fact of the hand traps, and I think that gives this card some good flexibility. But giving yourself more options to not lose to that combo is always a really good thing. Now I want to move on to some other cards that are just generally good against this matchup. I mentioned Scapegoat earlier, and Scapegoat is one of the biggest problems against this matchup because there really isn't a good way to deal with this card. I mean, we don't have green reboot for spell cards, so the fact that Scapegoat's a quick play spell card, doesn't really have a way to force a negation in response to it, makes it one of those cards that's really difficult to deal with, and that's why there's this massive outcry for the card to actually get hit on the Forbidden and Limited list. But there are ways that we can kind of handle this to help make it a lot easier of a process. So spell and trap removal is the name of the game. So Twin Twister is probably one of your best options here. It does require a discard, but let's say the opposing Sky Striker Trickstar player discards 2 cards, or sets 2 cards on their field rather, then that way you're going to be able to hit both of those cards, and that's going to force the activation of the Scapegoat, which means now you can alter your play to effectively find a way to get 4 monsters onto the field to destroy all of their scapegoats, and like I said before, that's going to make it so that they have to rely on the resources in hand and not generate advantage for free off of that single scapegoat. So any way that you can force the scapegoat out preemptively is going to be a good thing. Now another card that's very effective at doing so without requiring a discard is Hey Trunade. Hey Trunade will return all set spell and trap cards to their owner's hands, which means that they're pretty much going to have to use that scapegoat then and there, because otherwise it's going to go back to their hand and they may not be in an advantageous position on their following turn to reset it and activate it on that turn depending on the specific matchup. So it's basically going to force it, but it's also going to return all of their other cards to their hand unless it forces those activations, cards like Trickstar Reincarnation or any other reactive back row they may have. The cards may go back to their hand, but it's going to force a lot of things out, so that way you know everything that you're dealing with. Now, the downside of this card is you don't have the ability to destroy the cards, and it doesn't have the quick play flexibility of something like Twin Twister, and it can't remove face-ups like, say, their Light Stage. But it's very advantageous the fact that you don't have to discard a card, making it much more beneficial from a card economic standpoint. So definitely something to keep in mind. And if you're going first, Heavy Storm Duster might be something for you, because it kind of combines the best elements of Twin Twister and Hey Trunade, except the fact that it's not a spell card. But it does remove 2 threats, it doesn't require you to discard a card. The biggest downside is with Trickstar Light Stage, that can snipe the Storm Duster and force you to use it preemptively, or they can remove it before you have the chance to use it. But if you're playing a deck like Altergeist or maybe a trap heavy strategy, I definitely think Heavy Storm Duster could be a very good option. Now I want to move on to some stun options, because depending on the type of deck that you're playing, maybe going into the side deck games 2 or 3, or if you were just playing a stun deck in general, there are a lot of cards that can just completely stun this deck out and make it very difficult for them to play. One series of cards is cards that essentially just deny them from being able to add cards from deck to hand in a very similar way to something something like Droll and Lockbird or putting them in an awkward position. I'm talking about cards like Thunder King Ryo, Deck Lockdown, and Mistake. This trinity of cards is so effective because since the deck does so much searching, it's going to just put a damper on their plays because they're not going to be able to do what their deck does best, and they're going to be in a very awkward position because if they can't search the cards that they need for a particular instance, they're just going to have a deck of monsters that really doesn't do a whole lot. Now, you still have to worry about Scapegoat, but realistically, by being able to cut off 70, even 80% of their deck with cards that can stun like this, it's going to put you in a very powerful position, especially if you won the die roll or you're going first in games 2 or 3 and you're able to set up first. This also leads into another series of cards that pretty much just stuns the entire spell aspect of the deck, which basically comprises of like, 20 to 30 cards, and that is cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance and Imperial Order. By being able to set all of their spell cards to their field, they're not going to be able to do a whole lot during their turn. It's going to cut off the Sky Striker engine, could cut off the Trickstar engine, and realistically, it's going to make it so that Scapegoat has to last another turn before they're able to flip it up. So there's a lot of benefits here to cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance, and Imperial Order just shuts down all the cards together. So these are two really good cards. Again, they're a little bit risky depending on the deck that you're playing, but in the right instance, they can just be absolute blowouts. Now, last but not least, I wanted to talk about my two favorite cards in this particular matchup. The first being Mind Crush. Now, Mind Crush is seeing a resurgence of play. It always seems like this card manages to sneak its head back in here every once in a while, but it's because this card is incredibly good. Not only do you get to discard the card out of your opponent's hand, say that they just searched off of something like Light Stage or Engage or anything like that, but you also get the knowledge of what's in their hand, so then you know what to play around for following turns, and that knowledge can be really invaluable, and it's honestly more valuable than the discard itself. But there's some instances, because the deck plays so many 3-ups, where you can hit multiple cards with the same name just because of the circumstances, and that can just be an absolute blowout. The card's also pretty decent going second, because even if you draw it going second, you can set it, and since they're going to do so much searching anyway, you probably already know 2 to 3 cards in their hand, and then you could just Mind Crush them during the draw phase, get rid of cards that you know in their hand like Engage or anything like that, and that's going to put you in a very solid position. And my number one card for this matchup, undeniably, is Shared Ride. Shared Ride is the max C of our format, except it's still legal. Now, obviously there's a downside here because you can't use it going second, but even so, this deck isn't a deck that can OTK, like I said before. There are instances where it will be able to dish out the damage, but realistically, this deck wants to control the board and pretty much make it so that you're not going to be able to win through pure resource accumulation. So by having a card like Shared Ride, if you're going first, you can just set it and basically stop them from doing anything because they're not going to want to give you resources to help you rather OTK them or just so that you can out-resource them. Conversely, though, if you draw the card going second, you can just set it during the end of whatever you do during your turn, and then they're not going to want to push for an OTK even if they have it, because then it's too risky that if it doesn't go through, or if you have your own scapegoat or something to stop them, then you're going to draw 4 or 5 cards just because their cards do so much searching, and it's just going to put them in that awkward paradoxical situation where it doesn't really seem like there's a lot they can do. This is all the more reason you want to play a card like Ash Blossom, because Ash Blossom can negate Shared Ride, but in those instances where you don't have it, Shared Ride can be the card that wins you the match. So guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your favorite cards going up against the Sky Striker Trickstar matchup. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.